Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Through Their Eyes podcast. I'm super excited to be introducing this again for the second time. But for those of you who don't know me, my name is Josh. I'm one of the stepping in like co-hosts right now, and we'll let the hosts introduce themselves.
Hi, everybody. My name is Emily, and I'm also one of the co-hosts. Today, we're going to be talking about whether or not human nature truly evolves, or if we're just victims of circumstance. I'm going to pass over the mic now to Unvi.
Hi, everyone. I'm the other co host. And as Emily said, yeah, we're going to be talking about human evolution. So I just wanted to start it off and really just talk about what exactly does evolution mean to you? And what standpoint do we really want to hit this at?
Yeah. I think that's a great question. I think this topic is something that I think about a lot, which is why I decided to propose it as a video topic, well, as a podcast topic. And I am sort of coming towards it from a viewpoint where I feel that human nature in and of itself doesn't change a whole lot. I think we're afforded different privileges because of how technology advances, and I think also circumstance widely changes the way that we perceive ourselves and like the actual like virtues or the flaws that are put like on a platform, which I'll dive a little bit deeper into what I mean by that. I feel like people I feel like people are intrinsically neutral. I feel like you can either be like there is always like good or bad to everybody, but what brings out either one of those two sides is really your circumstance and how you're tended to growing up, which of course is just like a very like psych thing of me to look at it from that perspective, but I think the reason why people are seen differently nowadays is because we have more information and we can access more information. And because of that, we understand things better. And so sometimes that can actually nurture emotional maturity. Whereas people back in the day didn't even recognize like childhood as like a thing. They just like assumed you were born and once you develop, like they sent you off to work. Like now we're like, okay, like children are children. Like that's a very valid point in life. But I think at our core as human beings, our capacity for good and our capacity for bad is intrinsically the same, but just the damage that we can do and the good that we can do has evolved because of, like I said, the resources that we're afforded. So I think the feelings that we have as human beings, like our range of emotions, has stayed the same, but just like more so the impact and the implications of our emotions have changed because of circumstance.
No, definitely. I definitely agree with that. I know back in the day we used religion mainly as like I guess as an entity to really channel that good and bad energy, I guess, or maybe even just morals. Like for example, you have the Bible, you have the Torah, you have the Quran, you have other books that really just say, okay, so this is what we should act as to really just be as good as possible or to channel that good. And then here are like the bad things and then things you really shouldn't do. But back in the day, since we didn't really have that knowledge, as Emily was saying, it was just really difficult to comprehend, okay, why can't we do those things? We didn't really have that awareness, or at least in my opinion, we didn't have that awareness because it was more of just, okay, if I'm told to do something, I'm going to do it. And it's mainly just because society needs to function. But I feel like now it's more of we're given our own, we're given resources and we're kind of given our own brains back to really just look at a certain topic and be like, dude, I don't think that's morally okay. But now I know it's morally not okay because I can think for myself and I can actually understand what exactly is happening. Well, as like back in the day, it was more of, okay, the Bible just told me not to do it. But what are your guys' takes on that?
Well, I'll say as an extension of that, I think that it is. I almost like think it's kind of complicated. I mean, even with things like religion in regards to how long certain things kind of like gradually when we think about the evolution of humanity, like obviously there's an element that's like the evolution of like morals as well, or even like our ethical systems. And so this isn't directly related, but like a thought point that kind of came to mind is like when we learn about history or like historically the way things used to be, not in terms of human evolution, but like societal evolution, right? Like you hear about things like back when you had like these like ancient civilizations, how much more cruel things were, or like you take like civilizations like ancient Rome. And so a thought that kind of triggered to me was also like how have we grown into like ethics and grown into like morality as human beings, like the evolution of that perspective as well. Because to an extent, it's like, is it just, one day like a kid's born and he's gonna be more empathetic, or she's like gonna be more empathetic than before? Or is it like, how like if anything, that made me kind of want to bounce back a question. Like, how do you kind of what makes you think that sorry, why do you think that like these traits started to happen? Like what do you think were factors that caused us to start to exercise empathy like as a society?
Mm, I'm trying to Sorry, if you guys hear the thunder outside, it's genuinely insane. But in terms of what's making us further like nurture these traits and develop them, I think really it's just I think people at the end of the day, they have a desire to want to do good. I think sometimes like of course there is that like intrinsic sort of thing to want to act selfishly, but I think people also want to do good. Like just as bad as a person can be, I think we still have that opposite end where people they do want to do good. So I think with the development of ethics, because of course of like I think with the development of ethics, people have wanted to nurture more so positive things just so we can have a more I guess like kinder world because I genuinely think that people do want to do good at the end of the day. Like, of course, there are like bad traits of people, and there are people like who do bad things. But I think as a collective, people want good. So I think that's what sort of made people want to nurture those traits as well and sort of act because of them. Because at the end of the day, I feel like empathy, it isn't new. Like it's something that's just genetically like built into us. Like even like cognitively, like if you see someone yawn, you're gonna yawn. And that's literally what a part of like empathy is. Like it's literally like in your brain. Like there are neurons in your brain that sort of make you like feel what another person feels. So I think people have always sort of had that and there's always been sort of that like oh you see someone hurting you don't want them to hurt anymore like you'll give them a hug or like you see someone who's hungry you'll give them a little bit of your food there's always been that sort of natural inkling to do it but I think what's made people sort of nurture it is the fact that one people don't like negative emotion so when they see other people suffering okay they're like okay this makes me feel bad how can I help and then also just that natural instinct of okay like I want to do good. I want the world to be a better place. So here's what I can do. Here's what I, in my personal capacity, can do. So I think that's also a large reason for it. And then also another reason I feel is that doing good ultimately like pushes society forward. Like it gives us progress because if there are less people who are suffering, there are people who, more people are able-bodied to be able to actually like what is it? Nurture their skills and then also be productive people in society, which then allows the entirety of society to be better. So I think there's those two main aspects to it. But what do you guys think?
Honestly, on Emily's perspective, I was just thinking that exact same thing because it's like you want the society as a whole to function. I mean, in human history, it was very much like societies themselves that kind of rose and fall. I mean, like the Holy Roman Empire, these civilizations, they were all societies at the end of the day. And having like that empathy and having that goodness, especially, the goodness that we see all of these religious texts kind of push. This isn't anything new. This is always like a biological thing of I need the people themselves collectively to progress in order for me to progress because humans were social creatures and we really rely on that pack mentality. So it's like you really want a number of people them like all of them to really survive so that you have a higher chance of survival. And definitely as Emily was saying, with more people with different skill sets and different, mentalities and whatnot, all the different things that they can really provide for society, you don't really want them from at least a logical standpoint to be hurt or to be in a negative space because that doesn't allow society itself to progress. And life, biologically speaking, always wants to keep living. So it's going to find some way to do it. And I think empathy is definitely a trait that we've always had, as Emily was also saying, and that it's really just something that's also a biological mechanism to ensure that we continue our survival. But what do you think, Josh?
I was gonna add on to that that I think that like beyond just like these like sort of social mechanisms of society, and of course like the fact that we like have empathy as create like human beings, I do think that there's something to be said about like social movements historically or like social revolutions historically as well. Like even for example, if you take into account like early American history and you think about like the civil rights movement or you think about like the women's suffrage movement and those sorts of things, like I wonder to what extent is it just like there's certain things that as like a human conscious or like a human society we're unaware of. And then once somebody who is in the situation who is struggling is starts to spread awareness and bring about awareness, like how much does that impacts? And when we think about like evolution to that extent, like human evolution as a society, I wonder if, it varies a lot between countries, right? Like we ask, does human nature evolve or is it inherently the same? But you can kind of see time for this like emotional and social growth to progress. And I mean, an example of that, even just being the fact that in like a country that's like struggling or in certain third world countries, right? They're so much more focused on making sure that like productivity is right and things like that. They have less time to devote to thinking about like that social and emotional growth as a society. And so, I mean, with that whole train of thoughts, taking it back to the original question, like I would argue that I think human nature definitely does evolve, at least in regards to like empathy as a standpoint. Those things are part of the reason why people emphasize curriculum like a humanities curriculum, for example, because of the fact that that's kind of what you're exploring, right? Like that's that ability to become more aware or to kind of extend your awareness about different groups of people to bring about more understanding. So I don't know if any of those thoughts, back to the original question that started this, change your guys' perspective. Like, do you think human nature is like, I guess it's almost a trick question because there's constants and there's like also things that are changing, right? But like what's your take on that?
I think our range of emotion stays the same, but I think your point where certain movements or certain situations evoke a certain emotions, and because of that, you fixate more on that emotion, and then you also grow in it, and then you learn from it. I think that's like where I'm like, what is it? I'm trying to explain this. I feel like human beings like as like a blank model, right? I feel like in that sense we stayed the same throughout time. But I think people, and this isn't even come like person to person. I feel like certain emotions are more nurtured than others, so people grow in those emotions and then we see more evolution within a certain side of the spectrum, if that makes sense. Like as base models we're all the same, but then we all develop differently because of circumstance and like you were saying, yeah, like different movements which does fall under circumstance. Because I think with some people, they like their parents, right? Like they'll take them to go volunteering. So naturally, they'll develop empathy more and probably more intensely at like a younger age than say someone who one like grows up very privileged and isn't aware of their privilege. Like they think that that's just the standard of living that they have. So I think in that way we see differences, and then you might even see somebody who had like a less than ideal childhood who grew up with a lot of like anger and sadness, and then those feelings get nurtured, and that's sort of like their like standard temperament as like an adult, where like you see them as like a more moody person, but then you see someone who's like more empathetic, who's like more so like the type of person that's willing to help. Like I think I'm just circling back to what I was saying. Like I think we are all the same like in terms of emotion, like on that sort of same level. Like we're of course like sort of blank slates when we're born, but then we sort of stay on a certain side of the spectrum, like as terms of our temperament as we grow up because of how we grow up.
Yeah, definitely. I was honestly thinking the same thing as Emily because I was thinking on the perspective of social movements, and I was really thinking about like the people who kind of oppose those social movements. And honestly, I agree with Emily in what she was saying. It's very much like a okay, I feel like everyone has empathy, but we can kind of damper it or we can kind of put it aside. Or it's like for example, I'm gonna go spitball real crazy here, but let's just take Hitler, okay? Like, you have the Nazis, and these are very, like, interesting people. But at the same time, they are people. They're just people who are very influenced by a certain thing. I remember I was at the ROM and they were talking about Auschwitz, and they were especially talking about how the people, when they realized that Auschwitz was killing children and was killing a number of people that really didn't deserve to die. I mean, no one deserved to die, obviously, but like in their mind, those people specifically didn't deserve to die. They were crazy. And that goes back to Emily's point of, oh, they weren't aware of those things. And now that they're aware of it, it's like, oh my gosh, the empathy really starts to kick in. But it's also a socialization thing. Like, if you didn't grow up with certain things as Emily was saying, then obviously it's not going to be like firsthand nature. And especially with like the social movements, it's like, well, I didn't grow up being on a segregated bus, and I didn't grow up doing XYZ, so I don't really have that compassion for it. But it's not really, I don't think it's because they didn't have that empathy. I think it's just because they were socialized to not have that empathy. Because as society was running back then, it was kind of like oh yeah, I don't really want the black man to have a vote. I don't really want these people to, excuse me, to switch society up. So I really think that it was more of a human thing of like manipulation that really dampened their empathy rather than them just not having empathy.
Yeah, and that sort of reminds me of the phrase like hate is taught because I think with a lot of children, we see that they approach things more so from a curiosity standpoint as opposed to anything else. And that's literally because they have less like life experience. They've been, I guess, for lack of better words, like less tainted by the world and by circumstance. So for them, they're just sort of like, okay, this is all new. Like, what is this stuff? You know what I mean? So for them, like their initial instinct is just to ask questions. There's not really that intrinsic sense of like hatred or anger, sadness towards like certain things because they haven't actually explored like really much of anything. So for them, they're just more so trying to figure it out. So I think that's really interesting when we talk about humanity in and of itself. And I think children are a really great example of how like intrinsic human nature is because they haven't well, like at least with like a lot of children, like they haven't really experienced so much of the world so as to like hold certain viewpoints or certain attitudes of certain things. Like there aren't negative reminders of like past experiences because they haven't had those past experiences yet. So I feel like children are sort of like they're the best example of how like human nature is like by itself, I feel. Like with no added circumstance.
Well, one thing that this all made me think about was with the references you guys all made to sort of like hate is taught and like the examples of that is do you think because in that regard you'd almost think you're evolving towards like an incorrect goal, right? Like if you think about somebody teaching hate to a group of people, for example, and desensitizing them, right? Is their human nature like evolving or is it like devolving? Which I don't know if that's the appropriate word there, but I guess the question kind of becomes like, do you guys think we can go backwards in terms of like the progress we've made? Because the idea to me that we could go backwards would almost imply that it's not exactly evolution, it is more like change. And so just because of the semantics of the wording there, I'm curious, like, can human nature degrade? And then what do you guys think are like the basis behind how we even quantify if it's degrading, right? As opposed to like growing or progressing.
I think human nature can degrade in the sense that we see more, like if we were to see more ignorance. Because I remember, like, I see this, like, I see sort of like this rhetoric a lot where it's one thing not to know something, but it's a complete other to know something and then ignore that information and continue on doing the wrong thing. So I think like, a huge way in which human nature could devolve is if despite all the information we know, we continue to cause harm or we continue to do things that aren't correct or that aren't helping people or that aren't safe or ethical. I think that's a huge way in which human nature can devolve because I think when people don't understand something, they don't know something, it's like, okay, you can learn and you can do better. You know what I mean? Like you can be educated and then you can progress. You can take a step up with the information that you've learned and then continue to do better because now you know you have this information. But I think when you actively are taught things and you know things and then you continue to act in a way that isn't correct despite knowing that information, that's an entirely other thing. So I think that's a huge way in which human nature can devolve because I feel like if you learn information on like I'm trying to think of like a good example, like if you learn, oh, I'm not supposed to do X, Y, and Z because that can cause another person pain, right? And then you continue to do it anyway. I feel like that's mostly acting in like selfishness and sometimes even in malice. Like if the person is like, okay, I know that, but I don't care. Like I'm doing it because it hurts them. Like that, those are ways in which human beings can devolve. Because I think the natural like instinct when you learn something is, oh, okay, I'm not going to do that anymore.
Yeah, definitely. Honestly, I think Emily's points are very valid, but I wanted to play devil's advocate just because this was something I was thinking about currently when I was thinking about the topic and how I was going to talk about it. But human nature, as we already know, is very complicated. And I guess selfishness is something that I feel like we're also very in tune with. Well, not really like anymore because we have the societal things, but we do have that tendency because that is a biological thing. Like you need to have some selfishness in order to survive. And I feel like we have the two sides. We have that one that Emily's talking about, like how humans were all innately good and we all have that empathy within us because we can be molded and shaped. But then we also have that selfishness that's also within us, that need to survive. I'm going to go back to the Auschwitz thing because that thing really stuck with me and I'm honestly kind of traumatized by it. But there is this one quote, and I'm paraphrasing, I don't remember it. But he was basically talking about how it doesn't matter in the gas chamber where you are. Like a father can be stepping on his son to escape the gas chamber, just because like that selfishness and that need to survive is very innate within us. So to Josh's point of whether we would evolve or devolve, I think that it's like with evolving we devolve that one part of us. Like if we become more empathetic, then we're de-evolving that selfishness because we care more about like the mass mentality. But if we become more selfish, we're quote unquote evolving that, then we're devolving the whole societal thing. So I think one of them is morally correct and one of them is the thing that we're trying to get to because it's just better. And as empathy, Emily said, empathy is more important overall as a society, and that is something that we have. But I think that also the selfishness is another thing that we could totally evolve into, and that empathy that we still obviously have, it would just be very dampered because it's kind of that animalistic behavior. So one of them's more like a, okay, that makes us different from animals, we have empathy, and the other one's kind of like, oh, we're going back to that animalistic nature. Both are human nature, it's just one of them's better for the society overall and one of them's more negative, and one of them devolving would be a lot better than the other one devolving, if that makes sense.
No, I completely agree with what you're saying. I think selfishness is very interesting because just as much as empathy, it's deeply instilled in us because at the end of the day, as a human being, like you want to self-preserve, like you want to continue on living. Like that's something that's just naturally built into us as well as empathy. And similar to what I was saying before, I think ultimately like how we view these things and how much we nurture them ultimately depends on the circumstance we're in, and then also how we're brought up, which of course falls under that. So I think like an example that I was thinking of is like let's say like you grew up with parents who were very like physically like absent, like you didn't like see them a lot of the time and you sort of had to fend for yourself. Naturally, like you're gonna carry that selfishness with you throughout the rest of your life because you're gonna feel like you're in survival mode all of the time, so it might be harder for you to sort of like live in empathy, I guess, for lack of better words, because you're so used to being in this headspace of, okay, like I need to survive, I need to look out for me because nobody else is looking out for me, so I need to do this for myself. So naturally, you're gonna be in that headspace more than somebody who was taught to be generous growing up.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say that point that you're mentioning about like the headspace of being naturally, something it kind of makes me think about a little bit is the difference between someone who I'll say for now like the privilege to be empathetic as opposed to like some people, who are like struggling, like they don't have their basic needs met, right? It's very hard. So being able to exercise empathy for them, it's almost like a privilege like that we have because we're able to meet those basic needs. And for people that don't necessarily or sometimes not able to meet those basic needs, I kind of think about the difference between somebody who's always grown up with their basic needs met and being able to kind of like empathize and think at a higher level as opposed to someone who wasn't like that and then they kind of learn it or they grow into it as they're able to provide for themselves and then they start to like grow up in a society where they end up learning to exercise these traits. And
You know what this reminds? Oh, sorry to cut you
oh
off.
no, go ahead. Actually, I also had to lose my train.
I
Yeah.
was gonna say, this really reminds me of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is basically like when your like fundamental needs are met, then you can nurture more so your like emotional needs. And then like at the very tip, it's like a pyramid where it's like you have like your foundational needs, like your security needs, like not living in a place that's like completely dangerous and crime ridden, and then also having like food, shelter, water, and then like as you move up you move more into like your emotional needs and like belonging and like love, which I feel like love is almost synonymous with empathy, at least to me, because I feel like when you love people, you accept them for all that they are, and I feel like love is just the most like ultimate way that you can like humanize somebody, I feel. just because you're like seeing all of them as a person. You're just like, okay, in spite of that, I care for you and like I want the best for you. And at the very tip of the pyramid, it's self-actualization, where which is like really rare for people to meet. Like most people don't reach self-actualization, which is basically when like you are the best version of yourself that you possibly can be. And I think the whole idea of is empathy a privilege is such an interesting idea because like it's true that a lot of people they don't live in the most like ideal circumstances, so they have to focus more so on themselves and on surviving than being able to actually like be like doing things like volunteering or like donating things because they don't have the capacities for it. Like they have to work, they have to like cherish the things that they do have because they don't have things to just easily dispose of. So I think that's a really interesting idea. What do you think on me?
No, honestly, I think that, empathy is very much like I feel like everyone has empathy, as you were saying, and I feel like everyone has an equal amount of like potential that they can reach with their empathy. It's just as you said, some people aren't in a position where they can have empathy. And that's just honestly like thinking about it made me kind of sad because there's a lot of people I know who are like super kind and sweet and wonderful, and they don't come from the best places, and they still have to, like deal with those things while also being really empathetic. And I feel like that's something that, as you were talking about before, it's like that's very much human nature. We want the good for everyone, and I think it's even like above human nature to really just look at someone and say, "Wow, like I want the best for you. Like I'm not going through it right now, like the best things right now, but I want you to go through those things." And I can't really expand upon that thought because it's kind of something I'm still trying to develop, like mentally, even before this like happened. But it's just such a beautiful thing to see how people can be so empathetic in situations where they really aren't afforded that opportunity, but still strive to have empathy anyway. Especially like in situations where there's war, or there's situations where you don't really live on the best block of the street, or even like, you don't have the best childhood to really grow up with. And then you still have that empathy. And that's just really extraordinary to me. And we've definitely seen it in human nature like throughout history. So that's just very interesting. But Josh, I know you have to leave. Is there anything you'd like to say before you do?
Yeah, I have like just the next few minutes, but you made a point that I thought was really interesting, which was when you were mentioning this whole idea of these people who kind of go through harder struggles, or I don't like to use the word harder, but I guess, like different kinds of struggles, and they are able to exercise empathy. It sort of reminded me of this idea that, on the contrary, I don't want to say easier, but I really do think like a great amount of empathy would can come because you're just able to relate to struggle, which sounds like a basic and obvious claim, but I'm surprised that certain things I've gone through in the past in my life that used to make me very empathetic towards people, and then after a certain amount of time, after like solving that problem or not dealing with that struggle anymore, I've lost the ability to like really deeply empathize with someone going through it, even though it was something I myself may have been going through like 3 or 4 years ago. Like, it's almost like I think different people have kind of different capacities for their emotional memory, like being able to remember how they felt in certain situations. And so I just thought that was kind of an interesting idea because I really do think it varies between the person. There's people that could have gone through something when they were like 8 years old, and at 17, if they see an 8-year old going through it, it really sticks with them. And then there's some people where, they solve the problem and they just kind of move on and they almost forget. I mean, it's almost like, just as this is probably a very like trivial way to make it into analogy, but if you imagine like someone who's been in the gym forever, right? And they see someone who's like just starting to enter the gym for the first time, right? This is generally the only thing I can think of on the spot. And you think about any remarks of them like not being empathetic towards that person, right? Everyone starts somewhere, but you can take that to a million other places. Like somebody who's wealthy that used to be poor at a point in their life, you just notice a big split between people where they forgot what it was like to be in that position, or they deeply remember what it was like to be in that position. And I feel like that's so interesting. Like, what decides how somebody, like which side someone lands on?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, and I never even really factored in the idea of emotional memory because like I was saying, I feel like our capacity for emotion is all the same, but in terms of like how we deal with it, it might be different. Like emotional memory, like you were saying, and like some people who aren't as well off, like sometimes they have a greater capacity for empathy because they like literally feel your pain. They're like, they look at that person, they're like, oh, I feel your pain because I'm dealing with the exact same thing. And it reminds me of this one story I heard of this like homeless man. And I remember like this other homeless guy, like he like asked him like if he could help him because he was hungry. And like even though like he literally only had the change that was in his cup, quite literally, he handed him $5 so that he could go and get like food. And that was literally all like he probably only had like realistically like 20 bucks to his name. So the fact that he gave him so much of what little that he had like is very touching. And I feel like that's one of the stories where you see what someone who's like, okay, like I know what it's like to go without a meal and I would hate that for somebody else. So like they decided to help them.
Yeah, I also think that developmentally, like when you experience hardships, it kind of tends to do like two things. It can either really stick with you, as Josh was saying, or it can be something that you remember, but you don't really like remember it. Like for example, let's just take grief. Grief is something that, can stick with someone for a long time, or it's something that the mind can really erase. I think Emily can speak more on this because she's the psych major, but I've noticed that a lot of the people I know who maybe lost a parent or they've gone through some type of grief specifically, they either remember it so extraordinarily vividly and then they can be like the best grief counselors or they can help out their friends who are going through a tough time, regardless of what it is, just because they know that horrible pain. And there's other people that just can't remember a single thing from their childhood and really just don't even want to interact with that situation because it reminds them so much of their own like experiences. And I think that really goes back to the whole like quote unquote selfishness and then empathy because there's some people who they don't want to be reminded of their own past and maybe they're like kind of, I wouldn't call them selfish because it's kind of valid, but it's like okay, they don't want to be reminded of it, they want to keep and self-preserve, they don't want to throw their whole I guess like their sanity out because they're remembering those things. There's other people who all they want to do is remember those things. They want to remember those things to help and make sure that no one else goes through it. So I think that's a really great example of just like, oh, that's human empathy and oh, that's human selfishness, but they're both for reasons that, are considered morally gray or even morally good in their own way. You can kind of twist it. But I just thought that was kind of interesting how, developmentally it can be a lot more different than, someone who's gone through those experiences as an adult, but also with different situations like grief.
Yeah, absolutely. And to that note, I do have to get going now, but I hope that this is like that's like a cool thought to end on, I think. Like emotional
Yeah,
moments
I
and
think so
how
too.
people they handle things differently. So good luck with the next segment, guys. But thank you guys so much for having me on. I'll see you all around. We still have another segment, so stay tuned.
Yeah. All right. Bye, Josh. Alrighty, guys, and moving forward with that, I feel like I'm gonna be left on a great note, like Josh was saying. But our next segment will be our advice segment, and then Unvi and I have some questions that we are to answer. Hold on, let me pull them up right now. Okay, hold on. Our first question is, how do you deal with insecurity? I feel like I get imposter syndrome all the time.
Oh my gosh. Wait, that's a question. Okay, I kind of read that question and I was like, okay, I can think about that. But imposter syndrome sucks, man. I genuinely don't know how to deal with it either. I kind of tell my friends, and then Leah, she was on the podcast a while back, but I kind of tell her, and she kind of tells me that at the end of the day, you're all you have, and that's kind of something you have to remember. I think with imposter syndrome, I'm not sure. I think different people have different experiences. Again, Emily is a psych major. She'd probably answer this a lot better than I could. But what I like to think is that I'm my own personal advocate. And I'm also the only person I'll ever have. Like if everyone leaves me and the world ends tomorrow, I'm going to be the only person I'm ever going to have. So it's more of why do I think I suck so much? Like I've identified the problem, I just can't really deal with it. And I think right now, why and how I'm dealing with it is more of trying to self-preserve my own sanity because I care more about how people perceive me. And I also care about how I perceive myself. But if I keep being negative about it, I feel like I'm just gonna burn myself out. And that's a really non-specific way of answering the question. It's just something I also struggle with, and it's kind of difficult for me to, figure it out. But how do you think about this, Emily?
My honestly biggest advice when it comes to imposter syndrome is fake it till you make it, which I know sounds super generic, but I genuinely feel like it's really true. I feel like so many people, like even in jobs, they tell you like like if you don't like the position that you're in, don't be too good at the position that you're in because then they'll keep you there. You always want to like act for the position that you have, dress for the position that you want. Like, and I feel like that's a really good analogy, and I feel like that can be applied to anywhere in life. Like, you can be whoever it is that you want to be, but you just have to act like you already have it. Like, you already are it. So I feel like that can be applied in a lot of ways. Like, if you want to be somebody who's very confident and you're very insecure, you just have to pretend that you're confident, no matter how like stupid you feel. I feel like you just have to like find somebody who you think is super confident, mimic them, and then just like continue on like that even if you feel stupid at first. Like eventually like you'll just assume that naturally. Like it will literally just be part of you, and I feel like that's something that can be very useful to people. Or even then like you can create like an alter ego or something and just like make that the ideal person that you want to be. And then like when you go outside, when you go out in public, just be like, okay, today I am this person, and then just be them. Like act like you're an actor. Like you can make it like this fun little game for yourself, and then I feel like that's like one of the easiest ways to sort of like develop traits that you want to develop, which I feel like I know for me, like that's worked a lot, like especially in terms of school. Like I've always like told myself, I'm like, okay, like I'm gonna like get good grades, like I'm gonna be like a perfect student, like I'm gonna get like X, Y, and Z done. And I was like, okay, like, and that's sort of like the headspace I stepped into college with. I was like, okay, what does a great student do? Not just a good student, what does a great student do? And then naturally in my head, I was just like, okay, they do this, and they do that. And then I just made myself start doing those things. And then over time, I just developed over time because I was doing them consistently, they just became habits. And now I have very like good habits when it comes to school. So I think that is like I was saying, I feel like that's really the best way to go about it, and I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, it's definitely giving like law of assumption. And I remember
Yeah.
it's like there's this one Euphoria quote. I don't watch the show, but like I remember seeing it like on YouTube, and I think her name's Maddie. And she's like telling her friend, and she's like, "We're gonna be the best version of ourselves tonight," or like something like that. And I remember I was just like, "Oh, that's a nice quote. You know, it's something you should always kind of think of." But it's like affirmations, law of assumption, kind of like always trying to hype yourself up. But it's also like I know what I do sometimes when I'm trying to build a habit is kind of remember it takes 3 weeks to build the habit. So I kind of just force myself to keep pushing for the 3 weeks. And I say I'm going to quit after 3 weeks just because it makes my brain feel a little bit more calm. But then after those 3 weeks are over, I most of the time end up keeping the habit. So it's just like, oh, okay. You know, I already have it. So it's kind of a lot of determination, but saying cute little affirmations and then, you know, as Emily said, becoming that girl or guy, you know, it helps a lot.
And then another question that we have for our Q&A segment is, do you feel that some cultures restrict themselves from evolving or that practices are in place for a reason?
Emily, you start that one off. I'm not touching that.
I'm trying to think. I'm like, how do I, let's see. Hmm. I feel like for this one, like both sides of this question can be true. Like I don't think it's mutually exclusive. I feel like in some ways cultures or even just people in general can restrict themselves from evolving, but then I also feel like there is that sense of practices are in place for a reason. And I think sometimes that headspace of practices are in place for a reason can be what's restricting people from progressing. Because I think if I'm going to approach it from the practices are in place for a reason headspace first, I think people sometimes they might sort of do more damage in terms of good by adhering to a statement like that is because they people naturally want to stay where it's safe. So if something's been done the same way for years and they're comfortable with it, they may not want to change it because change means accommodation. Change means having to get out of your comfort zone. And that can feel very intimidating. So sometimes people may not want to do that. But then on the other side, I feel like sometimes there's also that phrase of, "Oh, if it's not broken, don't fix it." So in certain I think it really depends on the like let's see. I feel like it really depends on what the specific scenario is on whether or not like we're evolving or restricting ourselves because if it's something like don't steal, then I'm like, okay, yeah, like let's keep that one. I think that one, maybe we should keep that
Maybe we
one.
should keep that. Yeah. No.
Yeah. But if it's something like very specific, like, oh, oh, sorry guys, I got an Amber Alert because there is going to be says a flood warning.
Oh
Yeah,
my gosh.
flood warning until 10 p.m. tonight.
With
Sorry.
Emily's timing. It's okay. No, I think maybe you're thinking about like, oh, I know there's this one thing, and it's like, well, I don't really know what religion this is from, but it's like if you do X, Y, and Z, I'll cut all your fingers off. And it's like, okay, so maybe that was a little extreme. Maybe we
Yeah,
don't do that one. But yeah, I
yeah.
was kind of thinking about like the Amish. Like, me and Emily were talking about how up north there's a lot of Amish people, and I was shocked to see that because I'm not from the north, and it was so interesting because like they have a way of life and they're chilling with it. They're like they have protections from the government, or like doing their own thing. And I feel like for them, they're kind of just chilling, and they're not really hurting anyone, harming anyone. And I feel like for them, human nature is just going with them. Like they're kind of just doing their own thing. And I know that recently more Amish people are starting to get more technology in their settlements and whatnot. So yeah, they're like evolving in their own way, which is kind of interesting. I mean, of course, it's known to be very isolated and whatnot, but it's like that's kind of cool how you're seeing them being slightly more integrated. But what do you think, Emily? What's your take on everything?
No, I completely agree. I think there are certain things that can be beneficial to people when it comes to like changing certain regulations. I forgot what example I was gonna give. I was gonna give like a very like sort of like government example where I was gonna be like, oh, should we change our water filtration system because this clears out more germs than like what we've been using for like the past 20 years? Like I was gonna use something boring like that. Which in that situation I'd be like, okay, yeah, maybe we should change what we're using if it's like more beneficial. I think ultimately when it comes to things like that, a lot of times when it comes to this question, a lot of times people will want to stay where they're comfortable, but I feel like regulations are worth changing if there's something that can be more promising and bring about more progress. So,
Yeah, definitely. Honestly, like I think that it's like adaptability, that's something that humans have always used to survive. So it's like you need to have some adaptability or some flexibility in order to progress. Like I have a Hindu background, just because my family they're Hindu, and they always say how Hinduism has survived for so long just because it's very flexible. And it's like certain things aren't really set in stone. It's kind of just like a theory, and you kind of follow it, but like you follow it differently. It's not like, oh, you have to do this and this and this and this. It's kind of like, okay, you have to do this and this, but I'm going to give you like a vague way of doing it that works for you. And it usually does. So I think you have to have some sort of adaptability. And as long as you're adapting those things to the time and continuing to do it, it's going to survive. But yeah, Emily, any thoughts or next question?
no, I think those are all of my thoughts. And then we can move on to the next segment.
Let's go.
Guys, our next segment is going to be media. So, we're going to be talking about recent books, movies, music, anything that we've been indulging in recently. Do you want to start or should I?
Honestly, you go. I have like everything that you say, I end up just looking up at the end of the day. So I kind of just want your inspo first. Like, what are you going into? What's happening, Emily?
I actually this weekend I watched the entire Hunger Games series again. It was amazing, and genuinely forgot how much I loved it and how into it I was. I don't know, it just like invokes like this like sense of humanity in me. I'm like, wow, like I don't know, it's so inspirational to me. I'm like, look at all these people banding together to take down like freaking President Snow and to reunite. I think it's called Padam. Yeah, they're like I forgot what it's called. Their whole thing. But I really do love The Hunger Games. I bought the books when I was like 12, I think, because the first Hunger Games came out when I was like in third grade. Yeah, and it was funny because when I was watching Mockingjay, at least part two, I remember like I had this like flashback to me sitting in the theater because I'd completely forgotten that like I'd went to go see it in the movie theater because it came out when I was like in fifth grade, I think. So I was actually like old enough to be able to go see like a PG-13 movie without like them like questioning like, oh, like, like your parents or anything. So it was like that I think that was one of my like earlier like movie experiences because I wasn't really allowed to go to the movie theater a lot growing up because my parents were always like, okay, we don't know like what's appropriate, what's not. Like even if it's PG, like they would be like, no, no. But yeah, I don't know. I just have like an emotional like connection to the Hunger Games, which is like super basic. I know it's like everyone's like, okay, everyone's watched the Hunger Games, but I love the Hunger Games. I don't care. And then in terms of books, I've been reading Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. Um, that I really like so far. I'm not gonna lie, I'm only a few chapters in, but I really love classic literature because I feel like so much of it is just like so digestible throughout time. Like it's something I see as like a constant, like a lot of issues that are brought up in like classic literature, like we're probably like still facing in some way, shape, or form, like even like 100 or 200 years later, unless it's something super niche. But most of the time, it's something that can be like applicable throughout time, which I think is really beautiful because it almost feels like a time, not a time capsule, but I feel like it's like I feel like books are just like a way for like art to be preserved. Like even if it's just like written in text, I feel like that's really amazing. And then in terms of music, I've been listening to a lot of Hosier actually. I love Hosier. Let's see, what have I been listening to recently? I actually went to the beach yesterday, so I was listening to a lot of music because it was a 3 hour drive, like to and from. Um,
Wow, that's a lot. Okay.
yeah, it was super long. I really love Beach House, Space Song. I love Space Song. Master of None is also really good. I know The Weeknd sampled Master of None on like his album Trilogy. Like that's also really good. I mean, I love Beach House. And then I was listening to Do I Want to Know, like Hosier's cover. Love it so much. And then Shelly, like Clairo's band. I don't know if you know them. They also came out with a song recently. Cross Your Mind by Shelly is really good. Shelly is really good. Not a lot of people know Shelly, but Clairo's in it, which is why I'm shocked that not as many people know about Shelly. What else? Natural is also really good, and Steam. Really great songs by Shelly. And then
Steam is the one that my friend who was supposed to be on this episode, but she wasn't able to make it. She loves Steam. I didn't know if Shelly or if Steam was the title of the song, so I never ended up listening to it. Not because of that, just because I didn't have the time. But a lot of people I know really like that song. Like everyone likes Steam, and I was like, huh,
that's
that's
really
an
good. I think it's their most popular song, actually.
that's probably why. Yeah, that's kind of cool, Emily. Like the Hunger Games, I've actually never seen like Star Wars, Hunger Games, whatever like that. And
What?
I
Are
want
you
to.
serious?
I'm so serious, and it's just because like I've never read the Harry Potter books or Percy Jackson or like any of the series, and I was like thinking to myself, why was I never into that as a kid? And then I realized it's like, oh, that's because like I'm kind of like I have FOMO because if it's not a completed thing, I'm gonna be like really like scared, like oh, am I gonna be able to reach the next book, or oh my gosh, what if this thing comes out and I can't like? I think I'm just scared of getting like hyper fixated, and that's like a thing I've always had since I was a kid. I was always like having that FOMO of dude, if I get involved, what if something new comes out and I'm not able to be there to, like see the next part of it? So I was always just like, I'll finish Harry Potter when it's done. And is it done now? Is there no more books? Is it
I
finished?
actually have no idea. I'm not gonna lie, I was never into Harry Potter as a kid.
Oh my god, what Hunger Games is that done? Is that one done? I'll get into that if that's done. I'll,
Hunger Games is done, but they're coming up with like renditions in it. Who was that girl who played Snow White? What's her name again? You know what I'm talking about?
oh, Flip, the one that got a lot of controversy. Is
Yeah.
she
She's in the new Hunger Games, but it's the same, like, I'm pretty sure it's the same material. It's just
mm,
like a new, like, thing. Sort of how, like, Snow White, you have the original and then you have, like, the new. Like, it's like the same thing. It's the same premise. Like, it's based off the same story, but Hunger Games is done. But yeah, I think Hunger Games is more of, like, the Gen Z thing, and then, like, Harry Potter is more, like, the, like, millennial thing. Because I mean, like, I know people in Gen Z who, like, really love Harry Potter, but I feel like people who really love Harry Potter are millennials.
Yeah, honestly, let me get into that Hunger Games thing because, like, that's something I'm kind of interested in. No, literally, like, are you finished with your thing before I get into mine? I need to check.
See. Let me see what else I've been listening to.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, my favorite song right now is Sunny Day by Biba Doobie. I love that song so much. And then I was also listening to some Billie Eilish last night too. I was listening to I Love You by Billie Eilish because it's just such a nice slow song. And then what else? I've listened to some somber, and there's this one song I like called A-Lister by Romy Mars, which is Sofia Coppola's daughter, and she directed a lot of movies that are really great, and that song is actually pretty good. But yeah, that's my
That's No, honestly, like you're such a like a niche person, but like in the best ways. Cause like you have like things that are like, oh wow, like that's mainstream, but you just like somehow take it and make it into something niche. And it's like always like nice to hear what you get up to. Cause it's like, oh Emily, what are you doing today?
Oh my God, thank you. That's so sweet. Like
You're so unique. You're so preppy. Oh my gosh. I don't know what preppy means. I still don't know what that means.
I don't know what preppy means either. I just know what the aesthetic is. I'm just like I see it and I'm like, okay, preppy. Like I see like those like TikTok shop like magenta slides with the smiley faces on them, and I'm like, okay, that's preppy. Okay, I see it.
Oh my god, yeah. No, literally, I've been so like all over the place. I don't think I've been able to really get into much. I'm trying to reread Crime and Punishment. It's not going well because this guy, he's such an interesting dude. Because, like, the vibes I get from the book is more of like, I can prove my innocence to the whole world, but I can't prove my innocence to my own soul. And that's kind of like tripping me up. It's also kind of a harder read because it's kind of like I have the vintage version and the translation's kind of like jumbled, not in like a bad way, it's just jumbled in my mind, so it's kinda hard to, like, read it and understand what's going on. I just don't think I have the literacy capacity for that, so I'm gonna build that. I'm not gonna be like those American children that can't read past the 6th grade level. I mean, the adults that can't read past the 6th grade level. That will not be me. Okay, and then for movies, I've only watched like the really violent Indian ones that make no sense. If you guys want to watch a one-star movie, you should watch Meter. It's a terrible movie. Um, and then
I love. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
no, Emily, please go on. What were you saying?
No, I was just saying I love watching movies ironically. Like I will do that like to just make fun of stuff. Like I what is it? I watched this one dating show. Ironically, it was called Sexy Beasts, and it actually turned out to be so captivating that I sat down and watched the second season in one night. And this came out when I was in high school. I've been doing this for a very long time, watching stuff ironically. I don't know why. I actually watched Shrek ironically as a child because I had a very like developed sense of humor for some reason for a kid. So like I watched that ironically and I ended up loving it actually. Same thing happened with Sexy Beast, and I hate when this happens when like I start like watching something ironically and then it morphs into like this like weird like gray area where I'm like, okay, am I making fun of this or do I genuinely like this now?
Yeah. No, if you want that, like, there's this one guy. His name's like Neil Breen, and his movies. I think I've brought him up before, but his movies are genuinely like the most interesting thing. He's like a one man dude, and he's like making these like low budget movies. And like, there's it's so bad. He has one green screen. He has green screen steps in his newest movie. He got green screen steps, so he can do a lot more now. But he's great. You should really watch him, Emily. And all of you viewers at home, if you want to watch something ironically, go ahead. You can watch it. I don't know if you'll like it, but you can try. Yeah, and then for songs, literally I've been all over America right now. I don't know what I'm doing. So I've just listened to a lot of like Hamilton, which is I don't know why I've been listening to Hamilton. Him, uh I mean Lin-Manuel Miranda, oh my gosh, he's great. I love him. And then I've also just been listening to a lot of like indie pop rock, but like
So good.
I don't know. Like Emily, like she introduced me to the Smashing Pumpkins like back last year, like November, December. I've been listening to them, but I've kind of been listening to a radio, so I don't know what songs I'm listening to. I just know I'm listening to the Smashing Pumpkins. And it's going well for me. I mean, I understand what's happening like half the time. The other half of the time I'm just wondering what I'm listening to. Not because the music is bad. I just like keep hearing the same songs over and over again and I'm wondering what I'm listening to. That and then there's also Sales, and they're also a band. Like I think they were famous for "Go Little Rockstar," but it wasn't "Go Little Rockstar." It's "Pope is a Rockstar." Do you know what I'm talking about, Emily?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about because it was like it was like a huge thing on TikTok, like what they were like actually saying.
Yeah, and that I like that band. Unironically, they're great. They have like cool music. I don't think they've posted in like a while, but they're really nice. I don't know. I've also been trying to read more political books because that's just something I'm into. Right now, I'm reading the atrocities in like the Korean War, and it's more of like papers rather than actual books, but it's like papers published by like a variety of different people from like America, Korea, whatnot, and they're all like talking about their perspective on the Korean War. So I'm kind of traumatized. Like I had to go to the ROM and I saw the Auschwitz. I was like, you know what I should do? I should just do Auschwitz. Nature, life, and weird art? Absolutely not. I'm gonna do Auschwitz. So now I'm traumatized and I'm learning about the Korean War, so I'm even more traumatized. This is great. You should not do that unless you want to be more educated and traumatized. Then you should do it. I'm so tired.
No, what really great book. I feel like I mean, you might have already read it, honestly, because I know for me, like I read it when I was in 8th grade. I know certain school systems like they have you read it. Animal Farm by Orwell. So great.
I read that. I love that book so much. No, there's this one book. It's kind of unrelated. There's actually two books. They're both kind of unrelated, but they're books I think you would like, and it's kind of on this similar scale. The first one is Miso Soup, and that one, have you read that book? Do you know what I'm talking about? It's kind of popular.
No, I haven't.
Really? Okay, you're gonna like this one. So basically, there's this Japanese dude, and he's basically he's like a tour guide for this American. And then like during the time that he's showing him around Japan, he kind of suspects that the American's a serial killer. And I haven't read it yet, but I've gotten a lot of like mixed reviews and I want to read it myself. But it's also like the premise is kind of freaky and I kind of like that. It
Wait,
does have stuff to do with like prostitution and whatnot, but if you look past that it's kind of interesting. And then the other one is what is it, this one's, oh yeah, the hen, it's like the hen who learned how to fly or something. I don't really remember the title, but it's about like this hen who's trying to escape from the farm, and tries like to figure out what life is. And it's kind of like our topic before, like awareness. You're getting that awareness. So she was escaping from the farm and gaining awareness, and she got to have her egg, and it was a whole thing. I've read that book, but I didn't finish it because I was so sad. But it's okay.
wait, no, send me the titles of those because the first one that you mentioned kind of reminds me of like a Murakami like book. I read Kafka on the Shore and then I started reading First Person Singular and like only like halfway through First Person Singular, but I loved Kafka on the Shore. It's one of my favorite books and like that just reminds me of that. Like the first book, Miso Soup that you mentioned, like that sounds really familiar.
Oh my gosh, I wonder the books that you read now because like I want to read Miso Soup, but it's like also crime. I like that. I like the whole like crime niche thing. Like you know what you remind me of, Emily? Like, I think the first time I met Emily, I thought she was really into crime and thriller. Like those crime podcasts. I was like, she's into that. She's 100%
When I was younger, now I just love thriller movies. I don't know, I sort of developed this like weird thing where like blood makes me so nauseous. So even though I used to love true crime, like podcasts and stuff, I just can't anymore because it literally like physically makes me nauseous. But I do really love like mysteries and like the whole sort of having to figure something out. That's why like one of my favorite movies of all time is Knives Out. I love Knives Out. It is so good and it's just like you're constantly like trying to figure things out and then like the plot twists at the end are just so insane and I cannot wait for the new Knives Out movie that's coming out at the end of this year. Like I'm going to be like first in line to that theater when it comes out. Like me, please give me one ticket, please.
Oh my
Yeah.
god. Yeah, we do have to go now, but I honestly, I think I'm gonna read a lot of the things that you just told me to because that seems really cool. And I hope that you like Miso Soup and the other title that I'll send you. But any closing remarks before we end today's episode?
No, I think that's pretty much it. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode and I will see you guys next month.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. If you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it in the archives section at nissancommunications.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. Sponsored by StreamingGear.com and DeltaForce.net.